Hey guys, thanks for joining me for this episode of the Ripple Effect podcast. I am with my good friend and my editor, my muse, my guy that makes my writing actually make sense, Marc Schwarz. He has so graciously agreed to come on to the podcast today and talk all things Ripple. Marc, welcome to the podcast. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I'm doing great. Although, I understand, you had your second, dose of the vaccine and, how's that working out for you?
It's a little rough. I gotta
Really?
say, it's a little rough. Yeah. So they're not kidding when they talk about it being a doozy. So
Really?
a
Which one did you
little
get?
feverish. The Moderna one.
Okay.
So, and I'm grateful to get it. I know it's a good thing, and no complaints about it. But yeah, it's some fever, some aches. So this is either going to be profound or it's going to be a mess. We're going to see. I don't know. This might be like breaking down the barriers of reality and allowing us to have some like real spiritual insights, or it's going to be me just going off on these tangents that make no sense when I'm not feverish. So
Either way, they're probably Moderna is probably not going to invite you on to be their spokesperson for their
probably not.
vaccine.
Probably not.
Well, I appreciate you making time. I'm sorry to hear that there's been some after effects. I know you had said that you had it the first time too with the first dose, and then the second dose is kind of a continuation. And it's really interesting because some people have it. My dad got the Moderna version of the vaccine. He's only had the one, but had zero effects. He was tired that night.
Yeah.
And then, a friend of ours that we both have in common, you work with her on her books. And I do a podcast with her, Dr. Asha Prasad. She said she felt pretty tired, right? Kind of worn out by doing it, but then it was fairly temporary. So it's really kind of transient, the symptoms that you get from, these different vaccines.
It's the one thing we've learned over the last year. It's a weird virus, and
Yeah.
the vaccines, it hits everybody differently too. And I just think about the number of people that I know who've actually had COVID over the last year, and for some of them it was completely mild case,
Yeah.
and then others, I know a couple of long haulers where it showed up, in ways that you wouldn't expect, and so. Yeah, I mean, it's just nice to finally feel like the end of this thing is maybe in sight and there's some normalcy around the corner for us.
That'd be great. Yeah,
Um,
it's
it's,
been a long road. I mean, I was just looking at the calendar, and literally, it's next week that we basically went into
yeah,
shutdown mode, right, for
yeah,
a period of time, and a lot of pretty much the nation was on lockdown for quite a while, and
yeah.
we kind of thought, hey, by the summer, maybe late summer, things would be back to normal, and here we are a year later.
Yeah. I mean, it's been this really strange place. I don't think any of us could have envisioned, but I will say I think there's been some value in it, and that's not to minimize any of the suffering, which has been absolutely real for people, right? Physical, emotional,
Yeah,
financial. So much anxiety about it. People have lost loved ones. But I think for a lot of us, it's given us this opportunity to sort of reflect on where we are in life and what we value, what we think is important, and
yep.
it's put this new spin on how we see the world and maybe how we appreciate certain things. And I think that's something that hopefully we don't forget when we come out of this time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, during the lockdown, you and I kind of buckled down and got the new version of the book out, and you've been such a great captain of this journey, which has been so fun to kind of experience. The third edition has been kind of a labor of love, but it was also timely because at the time we were talking about, hey, people are going to we're going to need connection more than ever, and when
Right.
we couldn't be in the same place, couldn't have a beer, coffee, lunch, dinner, people were really sort of desperate for some ideas. And so when you and I kind of put our heads together, probably like I would say late March, early April of last year, as this thing was really kind of coming full circle, and it was pretty obvious that we were going to be in it for the long haul, and that the reality of connecting was going to be vastly different, right? Events were being canceled. There was no more in-person networking. There were more and more companies that were sort of decentralizing and sending their folks home. And how do you continue to build on those relationships both professionally and personally? And so I'm really proud of the work that we put into this edition of the book. It was not only timely, but I also think likely this is not the only time in our lifetime that we're going to experience something like the pandemic.
Yeah, that's what they say.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to me that as we sort of went in here, just as relationships became harder in a lot of ways to develop the way that we'd been used to, we also became more starved for those
Yeah.
relationships. And
Yeah.
I know for me, it was that progression of those first few Zoom happy hours were kind of fun and novel, and it was like, hey, this is kind of cool.
Yep.
And then you sort of
Not so much.
after a while you're like, hey man, this is not really feeding my soul anymore. Like I just really want to somehow get back to where I can, and I am not I'm not like an overly physically affectionate person. I'm not like a huge hugger or
Yeah.
anything like that, but I think this just probably changed me. It's like I really do want just that kind of proximity to people, and
Yeah.
yeah. So again, it's interesting. There's this idea of a liminal space, right? Which is this sort of space, in the moment between the creations, and I think that's really what this might be for us individually and as a world,
Yeah.
where we have an opportunity to create something coming out of this that reflects what we've learned. And I hope we take advantage of that. I hope there's not just such this rush to get back to normal that we don't say, maybe the old normal had some things that needed to be improved upon.
Yeah.
Let's take the lessons we've learned in this and let's apply that.
Absolutely. Well, I think that you're absolutely right. I think it's super critical that we walk out of this with some lessons learned and maybe different approaches to how we go about engaging with anybody, right? Our own
Yep.
family, our neighbors, our colleagues at work, et cetera. I think it's really important for us to say, hey, what can we learn from this, and how can we carry that forward to create even bigger, better ripples? So I think that it is going to be fun to explore, and I think it'll be a really unique environment for us to experience when things are finally back to the new normal. Because I don't think we're going to get back to the old normal. I think we're going to have a new set of realities that we're going to be faced with. But I'm kind of excited about it because I think out of every crazy time period, new innovations, new approaches, new directions, and what's interesting about our book, you and I started this journey back 16 years ago now.
I know.
Was when the book came out. Um, the at the time, and you've heard me say this, I really thought it was serving a really small market, right? A really small audience. And the book just kind of it was like the little engine that could. It just kind of took off and has done things that we never expected, and sold far more than I ever anticipated. So when we brought out version 2, or the second edition in 2000, late 2010, early 2011, kind of thought, okay, that's it. Now, maybe I should start working on something else. And I did, but I've never kind of got that over to you to start working on. It's coming, I promise, eventually. But, as we started talking again in like 2018, 2019, some of the nuances of what social media and social networking and all of those approaches, how vastly different the world was from 2011 timeframe to where we were talking, just
Yeah.
7, 8 years later. So at the time, it was really good, and we were really at that point, right? About, well, do we do it? Is it necessary? Is it something that anybody would care about? And then, of course, all this kind of just fell into place over the course of the last year. And that, yeah, not only is the concept something super critical, but even more so needed, right? Even my introverted, shy friends that are more like me, that are like, connecting, yeah, it's scary territory to be in, and I'm not a power networker, and I don't want to be, and I don't like those. Even those folks are like really desperate for, how do I connect and engage and
Yeah.
do it in a more meaningful way than just, like you said, the Zoom happy hours, and getting over the novelty of not being able to be face to face, much like we are right now, right? The technology has proven that we can have meetings, we can share ideas, have conversations, continue the same type of approach that we would in real life, but electronically. But I think people are still struggling a little bit with how to make that their reality.
Yeah, it's been a challenge. My day job as an educator, we are seeing in schools across the country just this huge challenge for families and students who are connecting virtually right now. And we've just dropped off tens of thousands of students nationwide who we have no visibility on. And I think it really comes back to this idea of community.
Yeah.
Um, you know, ripples don't exist in isolation, right? Like when they go out there, it is impacting this community of people. So how do we define that community? And I think that that's where, we sort of have to broaden maybe the definition of what we're thinking about when we talk about ripples and we talk about having these impacts, and what community looks like.
Yep.
Is it your customer base? Is it your students? Is it the people who are in physical proximity to you, or is it the people who have this kind of common interest now who can, through technology, connect regardless of where they are?
Yeah.
It's exciting in a lot of ways. I mean, I think that's the thing about this, is that it allows us the freedom to really do something that we probably wouldn't have done otherwise. We jump in because we've been forced to this brave new world.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to see what happens with it. I really am.
I am too.
I think that.
Did I lose you? Oh
no, I'm here.
Oh yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it's exciting to see what will come out of this and how differently things will evolve relative to, just the connecting piece, right?
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that I've experienced, at least with my coaching clients, is how much more relationships actually mean to people right now, right? It's I mean, you and I are a perfect example, right? We're good buddies. We can go have a beer together. We like hanging out. We generally have these amazing conversations. And although we're a little stunted on being able to do that right now, the possibilities that technology bring to the table for us to continue to do that, have this conversation as an example right now, are still very relevant. And, it's still something that I think that we can actually utilize this as a springboard to continue to improve and build upon those relationships. And I don't want to see it just go back to, hey, I'll see you at next quarter's, networking event when we go back to normal. I mean, I think hopefully that people have kind of taken a hard look, and hopefully through this book, actually we'll take a hard look at the relationships that are really important to them and realize that not only should I be putting more time and energy into the relationship now, when we're not face to face, but not only take that and lay that groundwork, but actually expand upon that when we come back to the real world where we are out, having a beer or sharing a meal.
Yeah, I think it shows us we can't take it for granted. And that's something that, you have talked about from the beginning. And, and you have always sort of epitomized that. I feel like, I've said before, I think your superpower is your authenticity. And that was something that came through in the very first iteration of the book. I think for anyone who is, taking advantage to listen to you read it on Audible now, it absolutely comes through. Yeah, I'm going to give you the shameless plug for that.
Thanks, I appreciate that. Yes, the book is now available on Audible.
It's like listening to you read it. It's great. It is really one of those opportunities to, like, this is Steve being Steve, and and I love it because I think that is why it has resonated with so many people from the beginning. It's not a gimmick. It's just the way that you have sort of lived your life. And you've done business, and it exists at that intersection. And that was one of the things that was so difficult for us, or at least for me early on, when we were trying to visualize what this book was going to be. Because it was like, is it a business book, or is this somehow kind of like a self-improvement book, or is this a life coaching book? Or and there were times where it's like, I don't really know, because it's all of those and none of those. And I think in the end, it's because you found something that sits at this crossroads that is really pivotal. And I think that especially now over this last year, as we've seen more and more the blending of personal and professional, right? Because we're a lot of us home, and those boundaries have sort of blurred into non-existent sometimes. We're Zooming and we're working in our PJs, and where your workday starts and stops just doesn't have the same clear lines that maybe it did before that. So, with all of that, I think that now the book has a relevance that is even fresher. So
yeah, I agree. It's funny because, I remember back to that original conversation, and I give you credit all the time when I talk about this book and the thought process behind it, because back in the day, right, there were a lot of books that were coming out, both self-published and through, traditional publishing channels. but that has exploded over the last 16 years. That market is different than it was when we first started. But I remember us sitting down at the Daily Grind coffee shop, having a cup of coffee, talking about it. And there were two things that kind of were unique about that conversation. Is one, you'd seen some of the early writing and you were in the process of massaging to make that a lot better and tighter than it needed to be. But we hadn't actually even we actually hadn't even titled it yet, right?
Was that when you had all those like slips of paper? It was like Kevin Spacey in Seven, and it was just trying to like put those things together because they were like different topics. And I was like, I don't know what this pattern looks like.
Just to be clear, I'm not the creepy version of Kevin Spacey. Let's just get that out there.
I cannot speak to the guy's personal. Yes.
Yeah. No, it's probably more like the Rain Man version of, Rain Man. Yeah, that I was like, what about this and what about that? But the thing that I thought was really great is originally it started off as a sales book, right? Because the frustration I had just sold a company, had a couple of consulting clients, and you were so great in that period of my life because you and I had, and we'll talk about our origin story here in just a little bit, but how you and I first met and kind of how we both kind of identified on why networking in the traditional sense is broken and still is broken. But, you were great when I sold my company. You were supportive because you had a venture that you were working on at the time, but you also had this experience in the publishing space. And I was out sort of figuring my way around consulting and how to help people figure out customer service and sales and leadership and just leveraging the lessons learned from being an entrepreneur since I was 22. And I didn't think anything that I had to say was of much value. But at that point, you asked me, hey, what made the difference between your business and someone else's business? And I distinctly remember this conversation because it kind of really made me stop and think. And I said, well, I don't really know because I didn't think what I was doing was all, there was no magic formula to it, right? It wasn't rocket science, take good care of your customers, take good care of your employees, keep your eyes and ears open and peeled for opportunity for other people. More of my business came from just connecting dots, right? And you're like, that's what you are, man. You are that guy. You're that guy that always keeps people's, mindset open to, you always keep them in mind, I should say. And you are always looking for ways that you can add and contribute value. And I don't remember which one of us said it, to be honest with you, but it's kind of like the ripple, right? You cast that stone and then we were off to the races on this concept because at the end of the day, every action has a natural reaction and everything that you put out there, good effort or bad, has that impact. And we just, from that point forward, we really got clear about what that concept was because we started talking about it for customer service. We talked about it for sales. We talked about it in leadership. But most importantly, we talked about it in the big, grand sense of the contribution that you want to make in your market, you want to make in the world. And I remember that was both a blessing and a curse at the time because as we went forward and got the book produced, then you were like, hey, go to Barnes and Nobles and figure out the categories that this thing fits into. And we were like, it's a round, peg trying to fit into a square, fitting. And it just didn't fit anywhere, but it fit everywhere. Right. So I remember having that conversation at one point with a Barnes and Noble's store manager. It's like, where's this thing fit? Well, it kind of fits everywhere. If it impacts your personal life, it impacts your professional life, but you could cascade that ripple down to multiple levels. And at the end of the day, and we've kind of arrived on that and talked about it in this latest edition of the book. It's like, tell me anything that you do in life that doesn't involve other people. And, unless you work or live in a vacuum, you're dependent on somebody for your livelihood or for your success. And those relationships are important and critical. And over the last 16 years, it's finally, I think we finally arrived on that as to how important relationships are. And now during a pandemic, even more so.
Yeah, absolutely. It was this, I still feel like in some ways it's almost like, we went to the island, we found King Kong and we like wrestled the ape onto the boat. We brought it back.
Yep.
And then it sort of escaped and is off doing its thing now because it was a huge concept. And I'm not sure that either of us really appreciated just how big it was going to be until we sort of released it into the civilized world,
I agree with that wholeheartedly. We kind of thought it was just going to be a tiny little concept to serve
Yeah.
a small sliver, and where it's ended up rippling to is it's beyond imagination at this point.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, it resonates with people. And again, that's a good sign that, it strikes this deep instinctive chord in all of us. And I think you're exactly right. It comes back to this need for relationship, this need for community, regardless of who we are or what we're
Yeah.
doing or what it looks like. We still need that. And, that's the power of it right there.
Yeah.
And
So
you've got just great stories, like every time, we get together, you've got some other story of someone who has, stumbled across this book or shared it with someone, and it's produced a connection for them. And in some cases, these are like really profound and impactful, ripples that have been created. And it's exciting to see. I mean, I've helped a lot of people write a lot of books over the years, and this is absolutely in a class by itself in
yeah.
terms of the life that the book has lived and what it's done for people.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. You're a big part of that. I think back to how you and I first met, and sort of the thing that started this, right? I talk about origin stories a lot on the podcast because I always think it's super interesting to look at where you are today, but ultimately look back to everything that you've accomplished in order to get to where you are right now. And one of the things that a big concept we talk about in the book is never judge a book by its cover, right? And trying to not prejudge people or let the stories in our head tell us, what the stories want to tell us about people. You miss a lot of key opportunities. And I remember us sitting in CEO Network, is where you and I first met, I
Mhm.
believe. And we were a little bit of the rebels, I think. At the end of the day, I didn't want to be there, but I knew I kind of needed to be there for my business. But I really do not like the process of formal networking.
Yeah.
You are phenomenal at it and very conversational with everybody. But you and I sat at the same table, I think, during one of the meetings. And I think I had been like to two or three and really hadn't acclimated myself into the group. It seemed like everybody was pretty tight knit, and there was a model to what was happening. And so I was more on the outside, kind of looking in and feeling very intimidated by the process. And so being introverted and shy, networking doesn't come to me naturally. And even though I wrote this book and you helped me write this and get this concept out, networking is still one of those things that I have to kick myself in the hindquarters to get out and do. And at that point, way back when, it was kind of crazy because I had been a business owner for, well over 10 years, had grown and been successful in my own right. And I remember meeting somebody that led me to that group that just said, look, you need to be with other like-minded business owners that are all trying to do their thing. And so I went and I took a chance, but I really, the meeting that you and I finally had that conversation, I distinctly remember where we were sitting because it was the old Kirby Lane over on 183. We were off kind of in a corner, and you and I were kind of like looking at one another, like they were going around the room doing their intros, and you knew, well, now, but at the time, you knew how painful those.
Yeah.
Let me get up and do my 30-second elevator pitch, and you kind of gave me a hard time from the prior meeting because I basically just got up and said, Steve Harper and my company name at the time. And I sat down, no pitch, nothing. And you're like, are you going to tell us a little more about yourself today? And I said to you, like, I hate those things. I just hate it. And you're like, you know what? I do too. And that's how we got started talking and having coffee. And then I think everybody in the group was like going around doing their thing. And you and I are off in the corner, just jamming, like figuring out all these things. But the thing that was really amazing is, I walked away from that meeting, and there are a few people that have had this impression on me or left this impression on me in life. And I'm so grateful that I didn't, and I held myself accountable to follow up. But I remember talking to you and being like, oh, I am not even in the same league as this guy. Really, really well spoken, very, very intelligent, has a really strong idea about what he's doing for business and marketing. And I was incredibly intimidated, but I challenged myself to say, I can learn from this guy. And I remember that, quite honestly, that I had absolutely no thought that I could contribute or do anything to benefit you in any way, shape, or form. But I knew that at the end of the day, there was a lot that I could learn from just being in your bubble, if you will. And so you were the reason our friend Barbara Metzger continued to get my monthly, my monthly
Oh,
membership, because you were part of the reason. I came back just mainly to continue to get to know you and build that relationship because it was so valued. And we expanded upon that. We had our own little inner group of pirates that
yeah.
sort of defied the the traditional meeting sense that she was trying to do. And God rest her soul. That I have a lot of, I have to give a lot of credit to CEO Network because I've met a lot of great people, but you are tops among them.
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, the feeling is mutual, and yeah, I always hated walking in and having to do that. It felt very artificial, very stilted, and so there were a few people there that I think there was a natural connection, and that was the thing that really struck me was that even within sort of the formal structure of what was happening, you still have these points of synergy with people,
Yeah.
and those ended up being the real value for me,
Yeah.
and being
Same
able
here.
to capitalize on that and to build outside of that, ended up being, what was really valuable. And that was what kept me coming back too. So,
Yeah. Well,
you know,
and everybody was, at stages of their business that they were looking for what was next, right? But if you think about it, I mean, Bob Richards was doing Black Lab at the time, Lillian Aaron was doing her, CPA software, Connie Brubaker, with integrity selling, Mark Bone, was doing, sort of the virtual CFO thing before there was
yeah,
that. And
yeah,
obviously, we had Bruce. I can't remember Bruce's last name that did this, the spas. You had Mike Richardson. Was doing his carpet business.
yeah,
And even though everybody had their own very direct ties to one another, every one of us kind of started to create this informal group, if you will, of people that really looked out and tried to contribute to one another. And I remember at the time, with your business and what you were doing, I mean, you were pretty instrumental in helping us get our marketing message out and kind of creating this methodology for a newsletter back when people actually did those things, right?
yeah, yeah,
Communicating stories of interest. Now it's like, somebody asked me, they signed up on our website the other day and like, why don't you ever send out a newsletter? I'm like, I really got to take that down. Cause I mean, we don't, we do everything through the blog these days or through social
exactly.
media, right? So it's just
Yeah,
different. But I remember how patient you were to sit down with me. And the thing that I always really respected and admired about you is um I was grateful for the help and the guidance that you gave me. And I always had felt like I was a pretty good marketer about getting our message out and doing things to at least build our brand at the time. But you really kind of changed that perspective and showed me how much further reach I could get. And I remember landing a couple of key clients that got on our list that we were mailing at that time. That tells you how old we are for you young whippersnappers that are either watching or listening this. And it wasn't an insignificant investment at the time to get that message out, but how those newsletters or those marketing blurbs that you came up with for us really resonated. And the
yeah,
thing that I always expected or respected about you was you weren't there for the necessarily just the business piece. You wanted to get to know who I was as an individual. I wanted to get to know more about you. We became friends that first year. We actually started fantasy football,
yeah,
completely unrelated to business, but we found we had all sorts of you know, different avenues of interest that were very common, right? And
right.
I think that's what allowed us to not necessarily just resonate as a business relationship, but really blossom into, I consider you one of my best friends. And you're just such a huge influence on everything I did. And so when that was for a year and a half, maybe two, I think at the time, in fact, maybe even earlier, because I remember we were talking during the first invasion of Iraq. We had Rosie Babin, her son was the
Hmm.
first, serviceman injured in battle, and we were all as a group there. So that was even a couple of years before we started working together and putting
Yep.
the book together. But you were there throughout that whole process. You were there when I was trying to build that business. You were there when I was trying to finally decide at one point to position the business for sale. I remember one of the things to not to, get your head, all full of, oh my God, I'm so awesome. But you were one of the first people that I went to and said, you know what, I think I'm ready to take my foot off the pedal. I think I'm destined for bigger things than to be in the office equipment industry. And I remember you sitting down and talking to me before a pretty pivotal decision. Cause I had, when you and I first met, I don't think anybody would have given 50 cents for the company that I was building because they didn't see what I was trying to do or what I was trying to accomplish. And by the time we got close to selling that company, we had 8 companies that were vying for us. And you had just a very well thought out, methodical way of figuring out what the best direction was and giving me your plain spoken direction and input, which proved hugely valuable at the time because I felt like I was so out of my depth when it came to trying to allow my company to be acquired. But you were one of the key people that said, hey, look, you've got other things that you can do in this life. And I mean, I credit you a lot with, this last, 15, 16 years of this entrepreneurial journey, not just the ripple and everything I've done around it, but ultimately, going off and becoming a software entrepreneur, taking on new challenges that I wasn't entirely familiar with, but would figure it out and learn. You have always been that person because you are an educator at heart. You're always good at educating people about what they need to do and coaxing them in the right direction because you see something in people. And so that's your superpower.
Well, I appreciate that very much. That does mean a great deal to hear that. So,
Well, give our audience a little bit of your background and kind of sort of what you were doing when you and I first met, and then what you've
sure,
done
yeah.
to present.
So like a lot of people, came to Austin to go to UT and never left. I grew up in West Texas, and I came to Austin, and there was trees and running water and wildflowers and buildings and everything, and I was like, hey, this is paradise. And so, I've been here ever since.
Yeah.
And I ended up in the '90s starting a literary agency with some friends. We were marketing titles to New York publishers and really doing some editing gigs to help them, get book proposals that they could submit to different publishing houses. And, it was fine. But like you alluded to earlier, that was sort of when self-publishing somehow became a thing finally, right? Like the technology got to the point where it was possible to design a book that was going to be functionally equivalent to the same quality that was put out by any New York house. And that was intriguing because there were people who wanted to not necessarily make money from the sale of a book itself, but it was the idea that the book had value, had credibility. And so using books as marketing tools, right, to be able to put out your ideas or your philosophy, or to give you that, we used to talk about sometimes as, kind of an inexpensive business card.
Yeah.
But the reality is that, so much of what the marketing, so we went from a literary agency to morphing more into sort of a publishing services firm. And then because it was the '90s, I jumped and did some stuff with a startup. And then because we had the bust,
I remember it well.
Yeah. So
97, 98 time frame, right?
There you go. And so capitalization sort of failed. And so then what I was doing when I met you was, hanging my own shingle out. And it was sort of a revisioning of what I had done before. It's kind of taking those concepts and saying, okay, is there a way to take these kind of high trust, high credibility, high value tools that we can use to not only attract clients, but to retain clients?
Yeah.
And at the time, that could be something like, even web content, because everybody was realizing they needed to up their game, or newsletters, because that was a thing then, or, sort of the blue chip version of that was actually doing a book.
Yeah.
And so, I did that, and, still keep my hand in it, with a few clients here and there. I get to be more selective now. I ended up eventually, 2008, deciding that I wanted to shift some gears. I was doing some marketing work for a company that manufactured gas pumps. And I was writing ad copy, and I just had this moment of like, is this my life? Is this my legacy? Is to write, ad copy for a fuel dispenser? I'm not sure that's how I want to be remembered. So I went back to school and got my master's degree in education, and became a teacher and then an instructional coach. and then a district administrator, and that's sort of where I am now, working for a little district, suburban district just outside of Austin. But it's kind of like where we were there. There's always that, you're always looking for what's next, right? I mean,
Sure.
I always felt like I've been an entrepreneur at heart, and there's that, like, how do I follow my passion? And
Yeah.
I think that, that conversation that you were alluding to that we had was sort of about that. It was, you can. I remember a friend of mine years ago said something profound about how real happiness is when your vocation and your avocation become one. When
Yeah.
sort of like what you do for a living and what you really want to do for life somehow overlap so perfectly that they're one and the same.
Yep.
And it's really hard to find that. But I think that, for people who do, that's where you get to channel all that creativity and energy and passion into something that you put out into the world. And
Absolutely.
so, it's, it's sort of where, is the journey, watching both of us kind of go over the years, and, where it's led us, and the connections we've had with each other and then with these other people. And it's been fantastic. And, I've met so many people through you. You connected me with, got to work on books that I would never have thought of, clients in Canada and in Europe. And, it's crazy,
Yeah.
and it's this testament to, yeah, I mean, what I hated about the networking model that you and I met in was that it was so transactional.
Yeah.
I get up and I say, this is what I do. And you get up and say what you do. And immediately there's this kind of implicit quid pro quo of, okay, we're going to, throw some kind of business each other's way. And, without a real relationship there, that feels dangerous in some ways,
Sure. Yeah.
and it certainly feels forced and fake. And, what I've been able to be really fortunate to do over the last several years is where it's just so much more natural. And so, we talk about like writing the book. I mean, really what it's about is having a good thought partner. And
Yeah.
that's the process that, you and I had started it already at Kirby Lane in some of those early conversations, even
Yeah.
before we formalized it. Right. But I think that's what made it successful, because, we could have those conversations. And the books that I've worked on, where I feel like, there's been a lot of great synergy, it's because of that same idea of, you just sort of, are able to talk and to bring it out and to help, people articulate their passion and their ideas in a way that maybe they didn't properly value before.
Well, you're
And
definitely
that's,
gifted in that space. I mean, you have a way of teasing that out. I mean, I'm thinking back to Thomas Magnus, who was retiring from his military career, very decorated military career. A general. I mean, he's a top guy, right? And understood the concepts of leadership and wanted to take the lessons learned from the military and apply it to the business environment. Has done phenomenal things. I remember connecting you two, and I just told him, "Hey, look, you got to know this guy, right? At the end of the day, whether you work with him or not, he will completely blow your doors off with what he knows about the publishing space." He was committed to go down the path of the traditional publisher route. I didn't give him your name necessarily to say, look, you don't want to do that, but you really do want to get some insight for all of the process and approach that you're looking to take. You're going to end up doing all the work anyway, so you might as well be subject to the biggest amount of reward from the book
yeah,
sales and the speaking and the training, et cetera. And you guys went to work on that book, as he was finishing, his local tour and then about to go on his final deployment. And, we're communicating, virtually in a,
yeah,
in a much different environment at the time. But he was just so thrilled to work with you. And, I know, Dr. Asha Prasad feels exactly the same. You guys are working on her next book. I mean, had that one, the name escapes me, I apologize, but that one individual that was tied to General Electric, up north, that you ended up working on that book, and his name and the title escapes me, but every single one of them have come back to me and said, thank you for that connection. And the reality is, I never look at it from that capacity. I certainly don't do it because I'm looking for the credit. I just know good people need to know other good people, and you are definitely good people. And you're someone that has been so great. I know people that have wanted to write a book, that you've been so gracious to spend time with them, and ultimately either they go down the path that they were already started on, or they choose to maybe not do it, or they just go a different route, right? But
Right.
at the end of the day, every single person that you come across, they're better for it because of the knowledge, the time, and the patience that you invest in them. And I think that's, again, I think that's one of your superpowers. It's one of your ways of creating the ripples, and you're really good at it, right? And I can see why you do so well in the education space, and in the administration role that you're in right now, because you're a thought leader, and you're really, really a visionary in a lot of perspectives. And but you can boil all those hard complexes, situations down into very simple, understandable points that make it very relative, whether you're dealing with, school administrators or their constituents or students and staff, right? And I think that's a strength that you have that is really, it's pretty impressive to just be around. I mean, I get inspired every time I'm with you, and I'm not trying to blow smoke up your skirt. It's just, you and I've never had that real true conversation about just how much you contribute out there in the world. I mean, when I think of a Rippler, you are top on the list.
Well, I really appreciate that. I tell you though, working on some of those titles, Tom Magnus's book, that was like a master class in leadership. I
Oh
mean, that
yeah.
was just so eye opening for me, because the credibility that he brought to it, and his vision for it, and again, authenticity, because I think that's been one of those themes, in people that I had the good fortune to work with. When you get to a point where you can be more selective in who you choose,
Yep.
I want to work with people who are good people and are trying to do something good for the world. And Tom met that. Asha, every time we interact, it is really like this life coaching session. And
Yep.
don't tell her, because then I'll end up paying her instead. But it's just her perspective on things. We've gotten to where we will talk on the phone, and probably the first 40 minutes of our conversation sometimes has nothing to do with the book. It is
Yep.
just about what's going on in life and in the world, and it's been great. And again, it's this like really natural, easy process, and it's completely the opposite of that kind of bad networking experience that we had
Yep.
early on. And I just feel so fortunate to have been able to meet some of these people, and to have had those connections. And so thank you for that. I mean, it's been a wild ride at times, and
Yep.
I wouldn't trade it. So
Well, I mean, I was thinking even back to, you were there when we started the 8-minute Ripple sessions, and the
yeah,
whole goal behind, you and I talking it, it ended up expanding that group of thought, leaders that kind of contributed to what we wanted to do. But when we brought the first edition of the book out, we wanted to create an event that was kind of networking for non-networking people, right?
right.
And I've always coined it that way for people that are curious about the 8-minute Ripple. And I just remember that you left me with the idea, but it didn't really click until I was naked in a shower, the day of the event, right? We were going to do this event at this bar. We had invited a bunch of people, and we had told them, just so you know, if you show up, no business cards, and no, nothing to know, that denotes status, right? Your
Right.
job title, where you went to school, any of that stuff. And I remember the conversation because I woke up that morning kind of excited for the event, but kind of amazed at how many people had actually said they were coming, and willing to pay to be there, which was kind of a mind blowing situation for me. But when you and I had first talked about this concept of creating an event for non-networking people that, don't fit, don't want to do the elevator pitch, all that stuff, you reminded me that, back in the old, pubs and, the salons of the world, that's where the conversations actually naturally flowed, right? There was no hidden agenda. Somebody may have had a problem, somebody may have had a concern, there may have just been a topic of the day, way back when, to early man. That was the sense of community that you were creating, and conversation created community. And I remember distinctly the morning of the event, I'm like, oh, this is gonna be great, thinking, can't nobody's coming in with their elevator pitch. Nobody's like shoving a business card in anybody's face. this is going to be fantastic. And I'm like, wait, if we take all the things that we all know to be conversation starters off the table, what are we going to do? And really, I'm like, I was panicked, and I'm sitting in the shower and I'm like, oh my God, have we just like set ourselves up for failure? Because what do we do? And then I went back to what you said about the old, and I don't know why the word salon kind of resonates with me today, but I do remember us distinctly talking about that. I think it was where, the arts and the literary or philosophical individuals of the day, all the way back to, back in the Roman days, right? That's where these guys from different, genres came together to talk about the, big things of the day and the future. And I kept thinking, somebody had to come up with something to get that conversation started. And that's really where the 8-minute ripple connection questions came up. And I remember calling you that afternoon, because I can actually remember sitting at my desk at home, calling you going, hey, look, I'm thinking that we need to actually put some questions to this. And these questions, we don't want them to be business related because we don't want to steer it down the business thing. So what do you think about this? And again, I remember you saying that's how you created a lot of your ripples. You'd find out what somebody's favorite superhero was and why,
Mm-hmm.
or you found where somebody would want to go on a future summer trip or whatever. And so you sort of kind of steered me down the direction of trying to create questions from a wide variety of things to have that salon experience. And then I remember us sitting back, after this 2.5 hour event, which was probably, so well attended, that we barely could move around that little bar. But you and I kind of ended up next to each other drinking a beer, and we just kind of like, clinked our 2 beer bottles together because we just saw all of this crazy interactions happening and nobody out there pushing an agenda business wise.
And the energy in that room was completely different than, what we had seen in those traditional networking events. I mean, people laughing and connecting, and it was completely authentic and genuine. And, and we know from some of the stories that came out of it, that the people did follow up on that. It did produce some great relationships down the road.
I mean, just those 2 guys, that one really astute executive, and then the startup guy that looked like he hadn't slept in like a week, right? Or bathed for that matter. But those 2 guys being forced to be in the Ripple pond together and actually having to have that question where, I still remember what it was, what's something you're passionate about, most people would be surprised to learn about. And they were both jamming on scuba diving and where they had gone and equipment, et cetera. And those guys, ended up leaving Austin and going out to the Valley. I would love to figure out, hopefully someday, maybe they'll come across one of my videos or whatever. Cause we didn't keep track of the list at that point. That was like a one and done kind of thing. But those 2 guys ended up going out to California to work on something together. And these are 2 polar opposite individuals that you could ever imagine, but it just took the one topic and the one conversation to bring them together. And you think back to that event, and then you think back to it's that one little tipping point, right, that creates a connection during a normal conversation. It's exactly why you and I are here today, right? It just took that one thing, a well-placed comment, a well-placed question. It can do amazing, wonderful things.
I think sometimes it's about finding the common ground that we don't know exists between people. And, honestly, right now, I think that is more important than ever because, no matter which side of the political aisle you're on, I think we can agree that we are a very polarized country. And, social media has accelerated that. I mean, we all know that you get in your bubble and it becomes really hard to get outside of that and to have these respectful interchanges with someone, who doesn't necessarily share that idea. But if we connect as real people and we find that, regardless of who you vote for or what policies you support, there's something that, is common to us. It builds that sense of community there that allows us then to, I think, safely disagree about other things. And so it makes it sort of diffuses the tribalism that has become so endemic to our society right now. And so, I thought that when we talked about the Ripple 16 years ago, this is a really cool concept. And I think it has some real applicability for our world and for how you do business and for how you live your life. Here we are in 2021, and I'm like, man, the ripple is more important than ever, and
Yep.
what it symbolizes for people, and how you, um, how you choose to live out your life in a world filled with people that you don't know and that you do know,
Yeah.
and how you choose to impact those people. I think that's really what it is. It's all this idea of being out there and doing something that has meaning. That's what we want, but so often we don't know what the path is right now.
That's
And I
right.
think this is a way that it gives people access to it in a way that is really important.
Well,
So yeah.
well said. Yeah, I think especially now, I think it's really important. I think somebody, when I first announced we were bringing out the third edition, they're like, "God, can't you come up with anything new?" And it's like, "Yeah, I can." But the ripple, I actually think we haven't even scratched the tip of the iceberg relative
Right.
to the concept and the ideas and where it needs to go. And it's kind of unfortunate because, pre-pandemic, I was kind of excited. I took on a new office space. It's not perfect, but it's a great place for us to start the 8-minute ripples again. And we can create that sense of momentum and community that we were doing because people loved it, right? People love
Hmm.
doing that. And it's a fun event to put on, and it's a fun event to watch the magic happen because when people can come together and just be, have conversation and be human together, the human connection that actually transpires in those events, the only word I can come up with is it is absolute magic.
Yeah.
But, I want to get back to those and I want to do them. And hopefully we'll get there in the next, 6 months or a year, but we'll get there eventually. But the work, as I told that person that asked me that question, the work's just beginning. In fact, I think actually now, even more so because of the social dynamics and the politics and the divide that we have as a society. And it's not just here in the US, it's worldwide. And the
Hmm.
reality is that you've got to have something that brings you back together. And I think why not focus on utilizing the ripple as one of those tool sets that could do that? Because I believe it absolutely can. And whether I'm a business executive and I'm trying to find better ways to get my team to work more collaboratively to create the next innovative or creative idea, you need connection there to make that happen. Whether you're trying to build or mend fences with a neighbor because you had a Biden sign or a Trump sign in your yard, and you're looking beyond those political views of the day to figure out how to coexist and engage and be a resource and support one another in any capacity, or you're just simply trying to figure out how to rebuild your tribe and find your community because now maybe this pause, pregnant or otherwise, has forced us to evaluate the people we want to spend the time with and where we want to make those investments. And some people, and I know this to be the case for several people I've talked to, realize that the people that they had been hanging out with or had been working with or had just been by extension sort of making that their default network aren't the people that they want to come back into the new normal and spend that time with. So it's given them an opportunity to reevaluate a lot of things relative to that. So I think there's a huge opportunity there.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And, one of the things that got me on here today was that I asked you a question about your previous podcast when you were talking about, sort of the value of ripples, right? And this idea of how do we quantify that? And I think that lends itself right now to, to this idea of, okay, as we move back into a more normal existence, how do we try to quantify those? And I've been thinking about it since I posed that question to you. I think one of the challenges we have is the word value,
Yep.
because in a business context, what we think about that is something that has monetary worth, and that is sort of the way that we're preconditioned. It's something that ties to our balance sheet.
Hmm.
Um, but there's this other definition of the word, really, right? Value is also a principle. It's also the way that you want to live out your life. And I think that is when we talk about the value of ripples, it's not just about creating some sort of monetary benefit, although, hey, that's always a good thing.
Yeah.
But it's about how you create the world that you want to see in existence,
Yep.
living out those principles. And that, I think, is what right now we have this ability to sort of think about as society has been put on pause. And when we start to emerge from this cocoon,
Yeah.
it's okay, what are those values that I want to be able to push out and to see this world that is better than the one that we inherited.
Yeah.
And and I see it all the time in education. Like I said, we've had all these kids kind of drop off, during this pandemic. It's because their parents, their families didn't feel connected, right?
Yeah.
There's not that community there.
Right.
And what's really interesting is, the districts that have had some success in getting people reconnected, it's because they're not coming in and saying, "Hey, you've been absent and you're failing." It's reaching out to people and saying, "Do you need help?
Yeah.
Do you have enough to eat? Are there resources we can connect you with?" And superintendents across the country who have adopted that approach, are reporting that it's not a silver bullet, but it is bringing people back. And I think again, it's because they're putting out those ripples without that expectation of a transactional sort of benefit, and just saying, if we do the right thing for the right reasons, and we say, let's help people for the sake of helping people, you know what? Some of the rest of this will take care of itself.
It will.
And these kids will
Absolutely.
start to drift back. And so I think that is, the lesson again that we're sort of wrestling with right now, in these hopefully final few months of the pandemic is, when we move out there, what is the intentionality with which we approach rippling?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think the key is to continue and expand upon that, right? A couple of things you said that I think are pretty key when we talked about how people were trying to maintain connection to people while they were in lockdown. I kept telling my clients, the best thing that you can do is pick up the phone and start having conversations, right? And start talking to those important clients or those prospects, but don't start with a business agenda or, hey, we were close to getting this deal done. And can we still do it, even though we don't know whether we're all going to have jobs or, companies are going to survive? But it all started with a simple question. You know what? I was thinking about you and I want to
Yeah.
ask, are you okay?
Yeah.
And that "are you okay" question is your door opener to just make sure and to check in with people with no ill intent, right? And it was amazing, even for myself when I started doing it, how many times people said, "Oh my God, I can't believe you'd ask that question." No, I'm not. And where that led, right? In
Yeah.
terms of conversations and what that door of opportunity that opened up to say, well, let me help you find some resources, or let me help you, understand what's going on or what the concerns or the fears might be and what we could do to tackle those. And the level of conversation from people that potentially were more or less, out there on the surface really got deep very quickly. And it opened up a whole different level of relationships. And I want to see people not forget that, because just because now we might see each other over coffee because we're face to face and the pandemic's behind us doesn't mean that that sense of, whatever is going on in their world doesn't go away. And that "are you okay" is a really good question to ask. The other question that opens up just a tremendous amount of value, I think, for people is, how can I help you? Right?
Yeah.
Leaving every interaction, every relationship that you've got with that question. And it people very rarely ask it because very rarely have the investment enough in the people that they're engaging with to care. And I think Ripplers really change that perspective. We really do. It's like, how can I help Mark with his business? How can I help Mark, get his message out? How can I help Asha promote her second book and get it out there in the world? How can we take that next level and play an active role? When you raise the question about quantifying the ripple, it really was interesting because I've always forever and a day said, hey, look, you don't keep score, but you do keep track. And the funny thing is it's not tracking because you're expecting something in return. If you in fact start to create a ripple for somebody because you think there's a big payoff, it's going to build your image, or there's ulterior motives in doing it, then don't do it.
Right.
Because the reality is that almost invariably will backfire or it will severely disappoint you. But the reality is, I also think that you do want to keep track of what's going on because you do want to see what your impact is out there in the world. I As you know, I put out a Ripple thought of the day most every day on Twitter. And for a long time, and I don't have a large following, and I see these influencers, and I'm feeling like I was born just a little bit off cycle, because I've got people that that have tremendous influence in the world, and it's like, where's that for me? But at the end of the day, that's a selfish approach to looking at it, and I just keep putting them out there because I just hope, even though I may get 2 retweets or a like or whatever, it's not about that, but it's the one person that it maybe makes a difference. I got a message just this week from 2 different people. One person that had said that they contemplate suicide on a daily basis, and they look for my ripple thought of the day as the inspiration. And if I happen to
Oh
not
my
do
God.
one, like it's a weekend and I'm out or I don't do it, they go back and search them up just to have a reason for that particular day. And then I got approached this past week for somebody that is somebody I've respected and admired from a distance in the work that they're doing. There's no direct business tie whatsoever, but he was a follower on my Twitter and my Instagram that just kind of piqued my interest. So I follow him, and I noticed he's been suspiciously quiet. And I just asked him, "Are you okay?" Right? I'm, not trying to press, but you were generally updating pretty regularly. And he said, "Actually, I'm better than I could have ever been, but I got away from social media, except for a few folks that I'm paying attention to. You're one of them, but I'm not contributing out there because I'm trying to distance myself from all the, the craziness and some of the hatred that's out there on the, social media platforms." And then he admitted to me that he actually is attacking a problem that he's been experiencing with since his early 20s. And he recognized over this pandemic that he's an alcoholic. And he said, really, I have to give you credit for that, because you unknowingly had an influence on helping me take a longer look at myself and see if the person in the mirror is the person that I really want to be hanging out with. And I
Yeah.
was just so blown away. Like, and so, you bring that full circle and you come back and you think, wow, here I am worried about how many followers I have, how many likes or retweets. And it has nothing to do with any of that. Right. So can you quantify that? No, but can you quantify it? Hell yeah. Right.
Yeah.
In a big way. And so I think that it comes down to your motivations and your efforts. And I really love the question you posed to me, because it really challenged my thinking on it in some respects and helped me even change my own perspective. But then I kind of think, whoever you believe in, God, universe, you worship heads of cabbage, whatever, no judgment whatsoever, but whoever that is that leads your life and your effort, I think funny things happen when you start asking these questions of yourself. You sort of putting that idea in my head, me kind of wondering, and then this popping up and going, yeah, well, keep track of those things because they do make a difference.
Oh yeah. I mean, how do you begin to really quantify that though? I mean, that is, that's a human life that, was headed down a path that wasn't a good one.
Yep.
And to know that, you had a hand in maybe helping him sort of turn that around is absolutely gratifying. I mean, that's why teachers do what they do, right?
Yeah, that's
That
exactly right.
idea that that for kids, you want them to have the best future possible, and you want them to be the best version of themselves possible. And I think that comes back to that whole ripple philosophy, is that we need to be able to see in others the things that sometimes they don't see in themselves,
Yep.
because they're so preoccupied with what society expects of them that they've lost maybe sight of the fact that they are, really exceptional people. I mean, all of us are,
Yeah.
these wonderfully unique, strange, wonderful, broken creatures, in so many ways, but we are capable of such great beauty and such great pain all at the same time. And to be able to, connect with people and help them see that they're not alone, and that there is, some sort of meaning there. I think, you can't put a price on that.
No.
That's for sure.
You can't.
But
And, we might not have been able to put a phrase to it had we not gotten together all those many years ago and sat down and brainstormed out the little book that could. So for
I
that,
know.
Mark, I appreciate everything that you've done for me. And thanks for being a part of this journey, because it's been a great one.
It has.
There's more work to do, right? There's more things that I think that are going to come out of this concept. And I am thinking about, the follow on to this book, but the ripple will never be done because there's so much more to, so much further where we can take it. And so I'm grateful that you're a co-pilot on that journey for me.
Well, I've really appreciated it. I've enjoyed it. It's been absolutely meaningful for me. It's reframed the way that I have seen my life. It was one of those things that gave me the courage to try something different when I went into the educational sphere. And, whenever I sort of think about, what impact I'm having on the world, big or small, it comes back to the ripple. I mean, so it's been just a tremendous influence on me and on so many other people. And I just feel remarkably privileged that I was able to play a role in it.
Well, you
So
played a
thank
big
you for
role, and
that.
I appreciate that. And thank you for those kind words. I mean, it's you're a big part of why it came to life. That's for sure. So if people wanted to get in contact with you to talk about, thought process they might have on books, or any level of, I will tell anybody listening or watching this, Mark is a brilliant marketer, and an astute studier of history and understanding not just our political history and our history as a nation, but ultimately understanding also how he ties that back into the business world. So looking at what lessons can be learned and how you can take that forward to find new levels of success. And so I know that you have very limited time because you're an in-demand guy, but is there a place that people could learn more about you, or how best would you suggest they get in contact with you?
That's caught me flat-footed here. So yeah,
It's obvious because I just put up your thing and you don't actually have
I
Twitter. You're
I
not
don't
on
have
social
that.
media a
Not
lot.
on Twitter, yeah, I don't even have a LinkedIn account that's worth anything. So honestly, I would say since these are people who listen to you, that if you don't mind, if they ask you,
Yep.
and then you can just share my information with them, and then they can get a hold of me. I'm always happy to talk. I love people who want to get their story out there. And, there's a lot of great tools right now, but it's also a complicated business sometimes. And so I years ago told myself that, for the investment of a conversation, if I can keep somebody from, making a mistake that costs them thousands of dollars, I'm always happy to do that. That's good karma.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so, I've had a lot more conversations that didn't result in any kind of business, and that's great. Sometimes it still was the right move for whoever I was talking to, and still made some great connections out of it. So yeah, if one of your listeners is sort of thinking about how they can do their own, what does it take to produce their own ripple
Yep.
effect? I'd love to at least give them some pointers, and whether they do it on their own or they find somebody else, or it ends up that we work together. Um, you know, who knows?
Yeah. Well, yeah, definitely contact me. You can, certainly send an email to steve@ripplecentral.com if you're interested in learning more about Mark or being in contact with him. I can help make that happen, or you can tweet me at Ripple on Twitter. You can also find me under that same handle on Instagram. As always, my friends, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of the Ripple Effect podcast. I hope you have found as much value out of this episode as I have. Mark is a genius, and I'm so grateful that we get to, be on this journey together, rippling. Hopefully you can tell how much admiration I have for him and what he's brought to my life, both personally and professionally. And I'm so grateful that you agreed to do this, Mark. So thank you.
Thank you. It's been a blast. I appreciate it.
All right. Do you want to lead us out? I mean, my coin phrase. So, I mean, I'll let you say it because, I mean, you help bring it to life.
No, I'm not going to step on it. You take care of it.
All right.
I
Well,
can't do
thanks
it
everyone.
justice.
Yeah. Well, from Mark and myself, as always, go out there and make good in the world, do good things, make a difference. And as always, ripple on.